some. Oh, got it. Thank you.
It's me. I nearly
Thank you. Yeah, just make sure we are recording this. What I was just explaining actually to the panelists, what we normally do is put it on Slack in a couple of weeks or so, because it's a shame for people to miss it if they can't find the time to attend, and then later on we'll put it on our YouTube channel. But yeah, a couple of little tiny housekeeping notes. Obviously we operate a safe space, so I know you guys know each other, but kindness to your fellow panelists and attendees is great. And we encourage lots of chat too, so do keep asking questions in the chat, and we might just actually open up the mic so that people can ask questions, just because there's not that many of us, so it's quite nice for us all to get involved. Thanks also for your donations. This time we're just going to donate the whole lot, because we didn't have that many people sign up. There's 16 or 17 I think, so I think it's about £100, and we're going to donate that to UNICEF for the protection of the children in the Ukraine at the moment, so we've chosen that one. But if you can think of anyone else or any other causes, do let us know, because we're always looking for good people to support and donate to. And yes, at the end we're going to after the panel we'll talk a little bit about our conference, which is coming next year. So but yeah, until then I'll hand over to Rach.
Hi everybody. Yeah, I'll keep letting people in as I'm talking. So yeah, as Alice said, thanks for joining. Do ask questions as we're chatting, put them in the chat, and we'll kind of scoop them all up at the end. And if you want to direct them to like one particular panelist, again, feel free. And yeah, I'll introduce our panelists and we'll get started. So thank you, three panelists, for joining us. First of all, we've got Gladys. Gladys is a content designer and conversation designer based in Paris, which always sounds very glamorous to me. And she's a consultant for the French government and for French and global structures. And she's also the author of UX Writing and a lecturer in content design, inclusion and accessibility. Before becoming a UX writer, content designer, she spent more than 10 years working for brands such as HP, Bose, Google, Box, Samsung and Kickstarter in media relations. So she's got good communications backgrounds. So yeah, hi Gladys, welcome. Do you want to just sort of tell us a little bit about, yeah, how you've got to where you've got to in your career and what you're enjoying most about it?
Interestingly, hello, and thank you for having me today. In fact, it was through media relations. It was one of my clients in HR who mentioned UX design. And I said, oh, wow, it's interesting. And I started doing trainings about UX design, and I didn't know about anything about content. I learned during my trainings and by training myself and reading books, pretty much. So that's when I arrived in this industry, maybe around 5 years ago, I guess. And I started doing the research for the book, interviewing people like Tore Podmajewski, or a lot of people who said yes to my interviews. And I think that's how I started learning my job.
Cool. I always think that it's such a benefit to have that UX design background and have that, like, so much of that methodology just comes in so useful for taking designers onto the journey of like why content is important. So yeah, I'm sure that background.
Regarding that, I know it's not the beginning, but I think it changed my perspective. I have a different perspective from people coming from content directly. Yeah. I think it's good to communicate with other designers and other people within the team because you understand their language.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a benefit, such a benefit. Thank you. Next we have Alex Barashi. Alex started his career in travel, so probably written about more ski chalets and mountain resorts than you care to think of. He then became a content strategist working in travel for a company called TUI, and then worked in roles at Snaptrip, Virgin Atlantic, and now Zoopla. So from travel to property. And Alex is heading up the content strategy team there, leading content designers and editors. So yeah, Alex, do you want to? I'm really interested to know how you found the move, like having been in travel all of your career into property. How's that been so far?
It's going really well, actually, at the moment. There's a lot more similarities than I thought there might be. I think the kind of geography of it all, and going to a place and needing to learn about that place, and then needing to learn about where you're going to stay and what you might do there, it's kind of the same. It's just that when you buy a house, you're doing it forever, whereas in my old kind of old companies, it was always about going there on a holiday. So broadly, the kind of subject matter is the same, and then the way that design teams and UX teams and how we interact with marketing and all those kind of things is kind of the same, to be honest. I think it's probably the same anywhere. So yeah, so far so good. Thank you. Good.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. And then we have Amy. So Amy Grinstead is a senior content designer for Ikea's digital experience team. She got into content design through PR and marketing, like many of us, comms backgrounds. And she's worked with Nordea, RNID, and the UK Department for Education, and Mind, which is a mental health charity. And Amy moved to Denmark, about 18 months, maybe nearly 2 years?
Yeah, 2 years now I've done, yeah.
So yeah, she's learning, well, Danish, I guess. Did you say you're learning Danish and Swedish?
Well, I'm learning Danish, but now I work in Sweden. It's weird. I kind of cross over a bridge into Sweden every day to go into the office. So I'm kind of surrounded by Danish and Swedish and have no clue where I am anymore or what I'm even hearing around me. So yeah, trying to learn a few different languages at once.
How have you found what's the content and UX community like in Denmark? Because everyone I talk to seems to be moving to Copenhagen right now.
It's kind of still quite small. There are a few people kind of scattered around Copenhagen and around southern Sweden, and over in Aarhus in Denmark as well. There are a few companies over there that are kind of investing in it, but I'd say we have a while to go until we're like Amsterdam, where they have like Adidas and Booking and Just Eat and all these other kind of companies. So it's getting there, and I think the recognition for having these skills is more and more, but it's still not as mature as some other places for sure.
I'm going to be there next week at a conference, so
I'm really excited. Yeah,
sussing out the community. So yeah, welcome all of you. What we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion. We've got some topics to talk about, and then we'll throw some questions to you from the audience, hopefully. So I guess like something I'd like to hear from all of you about as sort of an initial kind of kick-off question is in your kind of current organization or the community that you're in the country you're in, how do you feel about the kind of current levels of advocacy for content design as a discipline? And it's going to be interesting because we're all in different countries. So let's start in France for that one.
I think I don't know if the word lucky is the right word. I mean, maybe not, but the community I will talk about I will talk about the global community because, during COVID, we saw no frontiers and a lot of things were open and we were able to discuss with people we never discussed with. And if I see the community as this global community, it really depends on who you talk to, but pretty much, we learn so much. This period has been incredible in terms of learning and sharing. But then if I focus in the French market, a few years ago, we were not where we are today. We needed to explain everything, but we also needed to just know what our job was about. So today, it really depends on the structure and the maturity level, and we see everything. So from really beginners through really advanced companies. But that's what is interesting. And I think what we do the most is educate at every level, because even if you are a mature company, you still don't know everything about the job. So education is the key word in France.
Yeah, that's yeah, it is. I have noticed, like, in sort of content communities, there aren't ever that many UX writers and content designers from France, so it does feel like it's still quite a small community.
It's still a small community, but we see so many people interested. And I think with, because we have Kindred books, we have my book today, a lot more contents, so videos and a lot of things, not only because at the beginning, I think some people were able to speak English and read English. So people like me were able to get the content from the global community. But today we also have things in French, sorry. So it's a lot more easier for a lot of people who are stuck by the language issue. So it's really different. And we also see that the market is looking for our skills even more today. So we see position from French companies, but also from Meta and many other companies who are looking in the French market for talents.
It's good when you're a small community and there's a high demand, because you can charge lots of money for your services.
This is true. And if you have the skill, you can ask for even more. Yes.
Yeah.
That's the game.
And what about like Amy, that, like you said, the sort of UX community is still relatively small in Copenhagen. In terms of like content design, are there many people advocating for it, or do you feel like you're kind of a bit of a lone voice?
Yeah, I'd say the actual UX and the design community is, I think, quite strong and quite healthy, but I think content design and UX writing is still a little bit of unknowns. I think, yeah, there are some companies that are doing it and have put a good focus on it, but I know in my last organization, for example, we were working in multidisciplinary teams, so we had really good kind of exposure to all different areas of the business, and that was really nice. There are quite a few of us in there, but then we were spread out across Copenhagen and Helsinki and Gdynia in Poland as well. So that was kind of things going on in different areas, I guess. I think it's definitely could be a really good area for growth, and I think we do still see quite a few people saying, oh, hey, I'm doing that in my job. I just didn't know it had this name, or I've been doing this the whole time. I've been working with designers in this way. This is what it's called. And people kind of finding their way in that way as well. So yeah, it's getting there. Yeah, on an organizational level, I think it's really nice to have that kind of exposure and advocacy to all the different areas. But regionally, we have a little way to go over here.
And Alex, how about you? Because I noticed that your job title is head of content strategy, but you also manage like the content designers in your organization. Is there a good sort of level of understanding and advocacy for content designers? Is it still a little bit of a sort of unknown?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. So one of the reasons I decided to make the move over to Zoopla was because they've got a really good understanding of how important content is and what it can do. And they have content designers, and they needed someone to come in and manage them, because they were being managed by people in product teams, so design managers or even product managers. So I think that shows that there's like a good maturity in the organization for content design and needing someone to lead that. But yeah, it's interesting that they gave me the job title of head of content strategy rather than head of content design. I don't actually even know fully why that decision was made. I think maybe because I also manage content editors who write long form editorial copy. And content strategy is sort of how I've been labeled a lot in the past as well. I mean, I think for a discipline which is all about communication, it is interesting how the naming has changed over the years. I've told so many people they need, they really should learn more about content design, or they are content designers, they're not labeling themselves that. I'm hoping that as a sort of wider community, we're getting there to this understanding that that is the best way to describe it, and that is also what we should all call ourselves. Yeah, I
always find there's like even though companies know they need content, they don't necessarily know what content roles they need. Like in my organization at Flow, we have content editors, we have content leads who manage the editors, we have content designers, and we have conversation designers. And people often don't understand the nuances between those roles. And so they won't understand why they need a content designer and a content editor on a project, because they don't really appreciate that there's those nuances. And I wonder if that's like part of what we do, is not just advocate for content and the need to have content, but actually like the specialisms within content as well, which people often who aren't from a content background don't really get or appreciate. So I was just sort of wondering, in your organization as well, who like advocates for content and supports it, and is the person that sort of says, oh, we need some content help here? Is it your team? Is it you? Or actually, do you have advocation from other disciplines as well? Probably I'll start with you, Alex, on that, because obviously you do have those different content roles. So I'm quite interested to know how that works.
Yeah, so I feel really lucky that I've come into an organization where they've got some really high level experienced content designers who are already doing a great job of advocating their skill set across the business. I basically find that where you've got a designer or a product owner, product manager who's worked with content design before, then they quite often become advocates of it too, because I think it adds so much value, obviously, and people, enjoy the experience of collaborating with content designers. So really, it's when people have never worked with anyone like us before that it's a bit harder. And there's nothing like, teaching them by showing how great we are and how much we can bring to a project or to a sprint team, I think. One of the things that I was brought in to do as well was to kind of advocate for content at a much higher level. So with other, heads of and directors, whereas the team were doing a great job of making people appreciate content within sprint teams, I've kind of got to go around and make sure that the whole organization buys into it, which is a good challenge. I'm enjoying it. But yeah, there's lots of educating to do.
Gladys, I'm interested to know for you, because obviously you're freelance. So when people are kind of asking you to come in and do some work for them, how have they kind of been educated that they need a content designer? Is it an internal thing, or do you think they've just heard of this thing and they're like, I think we might need that? How's it working?
I see different scenarios. So I've been working for the last few months with a company who said, we tried with UX Writer, but it did not work. Can you help? So it's super interesting when you have this scenario, and I was able to do two different things. The first one was to audit their product. And so auditing, I was able to show them the issue I had with the product, but also I was able to see tons of problems from the structure too. And the other thing I did was interviews from the team, but the design team, but also marketing and brands and many people surrounding that team. And at the end, I provided with feedback, and we were able to discuss. That was super interesting. And I know today that they really want to structure a team and work differently. But then I still need to educate them on how do we do that. But another thing is sometimes, because you have people who think that our job is something when it's not. So I know that today I have slides where I said, this is my job, and I'm going to explain really quickly what our job is about. Or sometimes I have case studies I show. And the fact that I show we can align. So sometimes I see people and I know we won't be aligned. And I see other people who completely understand and say, oh, okay, I see it differently. And then we can have this discussion about what can we do together and how do we do it. So you have many scenarios, different approach. And what I like about freelancing is every project is different. Every way to handle the issue is different too. And that's what is challenging when you're freelancing too.
I'm so interested and also impressed that they recognized that a UX writer just wasn't enough, because I normally have the opposite problem where I'm trying to advocate for the fact that we need to do content design and start from the basics and foundations before we think about the copy. And I actually often have the opposite, where product managers are like, we just need someone to put the content in. So how, like, what kind of led them to like that understanding? Because that's so interesting to me.
From what I see is, I think it's just about ownership. And you had designers who are able to do everything. And then you arrive and you tell them, I'm in the picture and we are going to work together. And what I see most of the time, it's ego issues. But I see people who say, I'm able to write. I don't need you. Not all the time, but it happens a lot. But then I start having personas of designer, so I know who I'm going to have an ego issue with. So I know I'm going to handle the issue a little bit differently. And you have people who are eager to learn, and so this is the type of person you want to work with, because it's going to be super easy to work with them. I mean, it doesn't mean we won't have struggles, but it's a lot more easier. So yeah, why? It's just because when you do everything and you need to share the ownership, it's an issue.
Yeah, there's always that, like, I always find, like, with designers as well, there's often sometimes that, like, they don't want to embrace the blur between the disciplines because they like to have the control. So it's always like, once you can get the designers to become advocates, then you know you've really nailed that kind of relationship building as well. Amy, I know you can't talk about your current role because you've just started, but in your previous role, you like had, I guess, like, comparatively to the UX design and product designers, a smaller team. So were they able to advocate for you as well and say, oh, we're not starting this project until we've got content designers on board? Or did you find that you were sort of trying to have to fight your way in there all the time?
No, I think it was the opposite problem, where there just weren't enough of us to go around, and we got to a really nice point where the designers were like, we really want content design time, and we really want to have a writer working on this with us. I think it helped that kind of things got to a point where, you know, copy was being written by POs or by developers, and there were all those kind of really random strings and things that didn't totally make sense. And when the leadership kind of started on their, you know, digital transformation, they were really clear that they wanted content in there as a consideration from the beginning. And then I think it just kind of got to a place where we had to be there, we were working with them, and yeah, it was that kind of nice to have that we were embedded in the teams. And then the more that we worked with people, the more that they kind of had that light bulb moment about working with content designers. So when we had like a really smooth process and we were kind of doing, you know, discovery together, and then we were kind of working on right the way through, right up until, you know, translation and handing over to developers at the end. It was just kind of such a change for them to, I think, not have to be on their own and just kind of in their own bubble working on a product or something, and also just having that collaboration. And we even, you know, we won over POs and developers, and it was really nice for them to be able to see how much easier, and actually we do make their lives easier as well. It takes the pressure off, and people aren't expected to do things that maybe aren't in their skill set naturally or something like that. I think it is a really nice case of kind of showing what we do and easing their pain points and their kind of processes as we went along.
And to get to that point, what were the kind of key things that you or your teams had to sort of do to educate those disciplines on that?
Yeah, we did do some education with the teams around kind of the full stack of content design. So this is how we can help you at each stage. So literally kind of going through the discovery right through the whole design thinking process basically, and showing how we can be involved. what things we could take away from them to make their lives easier as well. So, you know, kind of going back and speaking to subject matter experts to really iron out all those little details and what do we mean by this, kind of freeing up the designers to do what they wanted to be doing. Yeah, we really kind of broke it down for them and said, this is what we do, this is how we can help you, this is who we'll speak to, these are the tools we'll be using. And then once we were both in Figma kind of working on things together, it was going, yeah, so much smoothly because they could just see how it worked.
Yeah, that show don't tell is just so important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just getting that foot in there to be able to have that trust and that belief in you.
Yeah. Gladys, you've also worked on sort of, I don't know what we call it, education programs before to take people through that kind of learning curve. How did that work for you?
Yes, but in fact, because I also mentioned the maturity, but I think it's not about the maturity. We need to educate because we have our own vocabulary. We think about stuff that people don't even imagine. I know a question I have all the time is, okay, but what are, I don't want two designers doing the same thing. So what do you do? And I say, okay, but I don't look at the experience the same way. And so I'm always showing examples. So when you educate people, I mean, we can educate them on what they can do super easily, but also how we will collaborate. But and also something I like to do is when we create guidelines, because sometimes the product designer are even more than the team of UX writers. So sometimes what we do is also create guidelines and teach it. So I mean, it really depends on the structure and what is needed, but education, like I said, it's the key for everything, because the more we understand them, the easier it's going to be, but the more they understand us, the better the collaboration is going to be too.
Yeah. Has anyone found success in actually teaching product designers or UX designers how to do content design as a way of just showing them exactly what's involved? You have?
Yes, all the time. But just like I said, the size of the team, if we are 3 people and you have 15 product designer, it's not possible to be on every project. So it means we need to work on guidelines, but we need to teach them the basic of UX writing to do more content design. And so if they're able to understand some thing about readability, if you can create a spectrum for tonality, at least they understand, even if you need to fix stuff after. It's not what I mean, being after, it's not what we want, but sometimes if we work on other project, we need to do that. So yes, and you know, what I like also is see who love content, because we have product designer who do love content and we have people who are bad at content. So if you start finding the right people, you can train them a little bit more and they can be a little bit more independent, and you know you will spend more time with the people who need more help, and you also take more time on key projects.
Yeah, it's so important, like finding those allies who love doing content as well and can get them into your kind of content design headspace just makes so much difference, because you're like, actually, I'm okay if you do the content on this thing because I know you're going to probably do an all right job of it. I'll focus my effort somewhere else where I can have a bit more impact, or like I know I need to be more involved. Alex, how have you mentioned education and doing a lot of education, I guess particularly in a new role and coming in and being like the head of a team. What kind of education are you doing at the moment to just sort of tell people about your team and, you know, your new role and how you work?
So telling people about my new role is just about meeting everyone, to be honest. So I've got this massive list from my boss, all these important people to go and try and meet in my first few months. And a lot of those intro chats is explaining, well, what does a head of content strategy do? And what do these content designers that they sort of know exist but might not have worked with, what do they do? Because I'm meeting people from quite a broad range of the departments, I'm able to explain to this wider group of people, like who we are and what we're doing. When I meet with designers and product owners, they already get it, so the conversation can go deeper. Whereas if I'm meeting with people, I don't know, in marketing or PR, they might not have much idea of what content design is. And then I sort of mentioned before about how the content designers in my team are already very well established. So just really encouraging them to keep seizing every opportunity to go and talk about what they're doing. We have quite a lot of, you know, company-wide ceremonies, crits that go on, showcases, just encouraging, supporting them to go and take content design pieces of work to those things. I think traditionally they were about showing shipped code or finalized, you know, visual designs, but actually, you know, spending that 5-minute slot educating about a content design project is a great way of talking to a few hundred people across the company.
Yeah, I'm trying to sort of stop. We had these like company-wide design demos, and they've just all up until now been about showing kind of finished visual designs, or like sometimes not even product visual design, but sometimes like illustrations or new parts of the product. But the fact that it was like so much about like the final polished design, no one ever talked about the research behind it or the content design or the rationale for the content. It was literally just product designers going, here's some nice shiny things that we've designed. So I'm trying to like stop that and make them combined research, content and design demos, so that the whole team can talk about here's everything it's gone into this thing. It's not just about making something look nice. There's like a whole bunch of foundational work and content design work that's contributed to this. And I think, like, to your point about like using those demo sessions to sort of tell a story about what the team works on, and the sort of contribution is just so important. I noticed I was looking through the notes that we had for this chat, and Gladys, you sort of mentioned case studies as well about almost like using those to show the work. How have you used those previously to demonstrate the value of content?
In fact, it came from my experience in media relations, because each time we were pitching ideas, or I mean, people cannot imagine what you have in your head. They can see the final product, but they don't see the process. So in media relation, we needed to explain what we did and how and what was the impact. So it's super, I mean, I have a few templates, but it's super simple. Like, what was the problem? What were the solution? How did we impact the people, etc.? What did we put in place? I just reuse that. So I use that when I want to try something, but I see that people are stuck. But I also use it at the end of a project, because we want the other part of the team to understand what we did and how we came through that solution. And so it really helps because it requires us to document what we do, to show the process and not the final copy, to show that it's not magic and it's not, I mean, there is a process. And so I think it makes our work and my work easier every day. And so each time, like, documentation is, I think it's key, because this is what create correct consistency in everything we do. So I think it's necessary. So what I do is I usually, when we have workshop, I take screenshot. I have 2 types of document, but I have like a Google slide. And each time we do a session, I ask the question we ask ourselves. I put pictures of what we did, the templates, everything is documented. And so at the end, I have all the project. I just need to frame it in a way that is compelling to people.
Mm-hmm. And people, like, I mean, I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think we often forget we do a thing and then we move on to the next thing, and we forget to like revisit what we did and why and how, and pull it all together. How do you sort of encourage that? Just let's stop before we move on to the next thing. Let's just reflect back on this and put it all together into a case study. how do you encourage that behavior? Because it is quite hard to get people into the habit.
In fact, when you show, I mean, in fact, it's super simple if you do it on a regular basis. Because like everyone, I guess, we have been in the position where you go from a project to another one, and then you say, oh, wow, I need to do a case study, or I need to do my portfolio, and you need to find, and you don't have all the little details you had.
Yeah, like, why didn't I capture all that stuff?
and that's why today my requirement for myself and for other people I work with is document every day. And I know we have a company in French called Alan. Everything they do is written, and they have to document everything they do. And I think I try to advocate for that. Let's document everything at every step, because it takes two minutes to do it every day, every time. But it takes hours and days to do it at the end or months after your project.
That's so true. That is so true. Amy and Alex, how good are your teams at sort of documenting their work and the outcomes?
Yeah, we used to, we also did kind of very regular demos, and I think that was really helpful because it meant that every few weeks or so we had to put slides together, and even if it was kind of really rough and ready stuff like screenshots of research results or something like that, it meant that we had something that was just kind of scrappy and pulled together, and then, you know, the end of a quarter or the end of a month or something, you could look back and you could actually see kind of an evolution of what you've been working on. But we also started a design blog as well for the team to kind of think about, try and use that as a bit of a reflection tool. So if a content designer had done some quite interesting, like a terminology study or something, we'd ask them to write about what they found and what surprised them and what methods they used. And that was quite nice. That started to get adopted, and we tried to kind of work different ways. So if people weren't comfortable writing something, we could interview them, or you know, help them try and carve out some time to write something that then we could kind of go through and just make it, you know, quite web friendly if they weren't, if writing wasn't their favorite thing to do. But yeah, I think Gladys is kind of spot on with the documentation and taking the time to kind of save those little bits so that you've got what you need when you want to reflect on it.
How did you encourage people to sort of share their work and tell their stories? Because I know that can be, I always find that really, really hard. People are like, oh, I haven't got the time.
Yeah, it can be. I think having the regular demos helped because we could see what people were working on all the time, and things that people may not necessarily think is super interesting. It might just be, oh, this is just what I did last week. Actually, there's like a nice little nugget in there. And if you can kind of help frame that as a story with them. We used to have like Innovation Fridays and No Meeting Fridays and things like that. So if people can try and save a bit of time for their kind of development work or something like that, if you can encourage them to give up half a day or just a couple of hours or something into drafting something, or just sitting down and saying, hey, chat to me about this project, and then we'll turn it into something. Yeah, that was kind of the route that we tried to go down with that.
So a lot of like probably nudging people as well, going, oh,
it was definitely, yeah, it was, yeah, trying to get that kind of thing off the ground was quite a lot of work, but I think it is the kind of thing that is worth it when you can get people to think about the projects they've done, but also just be able to share it as well is always really nice for them.
Definitely gives them something to, like, I don't know, people tend to like their little moment of fame as well, like if you say, oh, I'll interview you and, you know, put you on the blog, and you know, I think people tend to respond quite well because it feels like someone else is helping them doing the work, and yeah, they just have to show up and tell their story. Alex, what have you found work quite well in terms of encouraging people to share work more broadly?
I would agree that it's been quite difficult. Like that's a running theme in most kind of content leadership roles I've had, is it's difficult to get people to share, or at least to share publicly. So I find that often people in the teams that I've managed, they're amazing at documenting their own work in their own way. Sharing that then within the team is kind of like the first step, and then persuading them that it's something they should share with the whole community, the outside world, I find is like yet another step again. I think one of the small things I tried to do was just sort of say it's work. And I know that sounds weird, but like, you don't have to spend your evening writing this up just because it's going to be like on Medium. You know, writing something up to post publicly about a project you've done, I think should be like a core part of a content designer's role, and feeding back into the community. So I think that's one thing that I think we can do, is just make it so it's not a thing that has to be done or rushed in secret. It's part of your role, so you can find time to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout, because often people like think when they're, you know, when you ask them to, or suggest they write an article or put something together, it feels like they feel like you're asking them in addition to their work. And it's just, oh, I've got too much to do, I haven't got time. But actually, if you can give them the time within work in which to do that, they're much more likely to do it, take you up on that. Just sort of on that, like, I know it can be really scary for people to share work publicly, and people like often sort of have said to me, you know, what, I don't know what to write about, or I don't know what to talk about, or I don't know how to like frame it. One of the things we did at BT is we did like a sort of guide to blog writing for the team, and we gave them like a whole list of ways they could frame their work, like, here's a challenge I had and here's how I overcame it, or here's a project I worked on that I'm really proud of, or here's a case study, or here's a thing that I did that wasn't really part of my role, but I learned a load of stuff from it. And we gave them like sort of different angles they could take for the articles, and then gave them support with kind of structuring it and shaping it and like bouncing things off. So it didn't feel like all of the work to kind of create that was, you know, they had to come up with it all. It felt like there was a sort of a bit of a structure to it for them. I was wondering as well, like, sort of, you know, have you found within teams, I guess, I don't know if it's just a content thing, people don't really like sharing their writing, like even in crits, like people are really nervous about sharing unfinished work or stuff that they're still working on or they're not sure about. Like, we always feel like we have to have some level of perfection before we share it. I wondered if that's something any of you have found as well, is that people, they kind of want to write, but then they don't want to share it with anybody because there's just that sort of criticism that stops people doing that.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you go on.
I was just going to say that I actually, in the past, have found it more an issue with people who are sort of like long form content editors. I found that quite often they would be really nervous to share like big kind of blog posts or articles. Whereas, I don't know, it's probably just my experience, but actually the content designers working on kind of, you know, smaller bits of microcopy, often collaborating hand in hand with visual designers, I found it's a bit easier to persuade them to share it, because hopefully they're already co-working on stuff or working closely with, you know, a team of people. So they're kind of sharing as they go. But definitely I found that an issue with sort of longer form, which is probably why when I then have suggested people write up their experiences for a blog about, you know, how they work, that also makes them nervous. Yeah. I guess all we can do really is offer to support and proof and all those kind of things to ease them through it.
Yeah, Amy, you were going to say something as well then.
Yeah, I think something that we did find worked quite well a couple of times was having the content designer pair up with someone else, like a product designer or a service designer or someone they've been working with, and work on something together. I don't know if it's like a bit of a safety in numbers kind of thing, like it's, or even if it's just a continuation of their collaboration or something. But that seemed to make it feel a little bit easier for people to be able to kind of partner up on something as well and get it out that way. Yeah, I really liked kind of seeing what people could do like that and share each other's experiences.
Can I add something maybe? I think that also what can be scary is the way people provide feedback. So I believe that there is a way, and I think we need to teach people how to give feedback in a way that is not aggressive. because otherwise you have people who don't want this aggressiveness. And what I most of the time, what I see is also people who are looking for feedback from users, from the team. And so that's what Crit are for. And if we can have a safe place during this time with content people, with other designers, and be able to share the feedback without triggering someone, I think that's what we need to.
Yeah. And you're right, because I think like when we're sharing the work, when we critique the work, like it's, you know, it's the work, but when it's someone's writing like about a thing they've done, or, you know, that's their personal kind of story or whatever, it feels a bit more personal. So it's almost like you have to be even more sort of not clever, but like constructive about how you feedback and careful about how you feedback. Because you put someone off doing something once and they will never write it again. They'll never want to put themselves forward for anything again. So yeah, I think that feedback is so important. That feedback. I've often had people sort of say to me, you know, ask me about writing books or having the confidence to talk at events. And like, you don't just go in straight away and talk at an event or write a book. Like you start small. Like I think I started writing blog posts about content design like 10, 12 years ago when no one was even interested in them. But like, it's just confidence over time that builds up. So you start off with one blog post and two, and then three. And actually, I think that's what some people forget. They think, you know, oh, I don't want to go and speak at an event, or I don't want to write a massive like long article, but you have to start small. Like maybe it's, I don't know, a tiny internal blog post for the company newsletter first, and then you build up that confidence. It's not like you're just not going to go out straight overnight and, you know, be having articles published in magazines. Like it's not a thing that happens. It takes time to kind of build that confidence. And I just wondered if that's something I mean, Gladys, you must have had that as well, because, you know, you've written books, you must have people sort of asking you, how do you sort of, how do you advise people and inspire them to kind of get out there and talk publicly about what they do? Because I guess, like, you know, once you publish something, people are like, oh, you know, that's so amazing. How do I, like, oh, I could never do that. Like, you could do it, but you've just got to have that like expectation around the steps to get there. So what do you sort of advise people in that instance?
Not my only advice, but the key advice, I guess, it's when you tell story, and when I was in media relation, that was already the topic. The coverage or the story that got a lot of coverage were good stories. And so I think my advice is look for something you're passionate about, you want to learn everything about, or something you have tried and you think it's super interesting and a good story to share. And because, you know what, I'm always bored when I see always the same topic. Like a while ago, it was what is UX writing, and you had 10 articles just saying the same thing. And our job is so rich. Yeah, we have so many things, like just the topic. Like if you work in a certain area, you have so many things to share. If you do something specific, if you love research, or if inclusion, like just like me, inclusion and accessibility, or many other things, or a specific topic, learn everything you can, not everything you can, but learn about that, do the job. And the story will be interesting because you will teach maybe one person, maybe a little bit more. But if you care about your topic, it will be interesting.
Does that help? Do you think people like often have imposter syndrome because they don't think that they have those interesting topics in them? Like, I don't know.
But all the time, I always hear people telling me, but I have nothing to share. And each time I listen to their story and I say, you know, you have things, you can talk about this and that and that. And we have this Clubhouse community, and every time we offer other people, so we decided to do it in French. I would have loved to talk with people like all of you, but we wanted to create that French community and have people talk about what they do in French. And so we invited tons of people who never talked before and believed they had nothing to say. And what we loved was that they had nothing to prepare. We just had one briefing together just to know what they were able to talk about. And we made it safe for them to discuss the topic they were happy to share with us. But so it's always about having safe place, but also showing people they have, I mean, if we show the trust we have in them, they will start being confident about doing it.
I love that idea of having that sort of clubhouse chat where people could just come and share a story, because I guess that's probably like really that's like a real confidence boost for people as well, is just coming away from that and thinking, wow, like people were genuinely sort of interested in my story. Maybe I do have something to share.
But each time you talk with someone, you can hear out 5, 6, 7 stories. So it just yes, I think we're really about giving people trust and amplifying other voices, just helping with what we have and the little power or visibility we have.
Yeah, I think that like Amy, you were saying earlier as well about buddying people up a little bit so they don't feel like they're sort of telling the story on their own. I don't think we see enough of that at conferences. It tends to be people kind of, I think I've only ever been to one conference where I've seen a couple of people up together talking about a project they worked on together, and I was just like, it was just really refreshing, because I just don't think you see that very often.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think I've only seen it a couple of times as well, but I always quite enjoy those. It's really interesting to hear how the kind of the collaboration went for that team, and kind of how they worked together and what they were doing. And yeah, I think it does maybe give that kind of a bit more psychological safety, I guess, to put yourself out there because you're with someone else. But yeah, I mean, like Gladys was saying, just people have all these kind of stories inside them, even if they think they don't. So sometimes it's just about having those, like just grabbing a coffee with someone who you've heard something interesting that they're working on, and just kind of talking things through and just seeing what comes up, and yeah, seeing what they just end up telling you when they think they're not really talking about very much, because there's definitely something inside there that they can write about and that people will want to hear about. Yeah.
In fact, I just remembered, Alex, I think you and Laura came and did a double act, didn't you, at one of our conferences?
Exactly what I was thinking, actually. Yeah, it was great fun. It was and it was really nice having that kind of safety net of having another person stood there, and we'd done all the work together, so it made sense to present it back together as well. It was great.
Yeah, we just do more of that. I was just wondering about within work as well, like what you've seen work well for helping people become more confident in promoting themselves, and like, I guess what I mean by that is, you know, often I feel like, particularly content designers, we're not very good at promoting ourselves and talking about our work and saying, I worked on this thing and hey, the results were really good. We're quite introverted naturally, and we're quite kind of, you know, we just get on with it. How have you helped sort of content designers, I guess, get a bit more confident in shouting about their work and shouting about their successes? Because that's such an important thing if we're to demonstrate the value of content design and get that buy-in. So yeah, I just wondered how you've dealt with that. Gladys, I'll start with you on that one.
Yes. So we often say that when we see other people in this position telling a different type of stories, or just being visible, it can give you the desire to also do something, or you can see that it's reachable. But then what we try to do as a community is also explain, because a lot of people come from copywriting, and sometimes the salary they were not paid enough, or they need to gain responsibilities. So I know I have open discussion about salaries, and I also ask people to do their homework and see not only in the French market, but also in other markets, and start comparing and discussing. So I think we need to be a lot more open about everything, like money, work, difficulties, mistakes we make. And so you mentioned promoting the work, but promoting the work is also about being comfortable in everything you do. And so when you gain this confidence, and you have a community that back you, it's even more easier to go and talk to them and say, oh, can you help me with that? Or I want to do a talk, or can you, how did you do that? So I think we need this community. This is what we try to build. It's not only me, we have different people like Camille and many others in the French community, but I can grow by myself, but it's not going to help anyone, even myself. So we need to do the work as a community and help us grow and reach the levels and change positions and have more lead positions. And this is what we see today. So I'm really happy. But so it's about creating that culture of sharing and helping and everything else.
Yeah,
I hope it was clear.
it is like kind of growing together, isn't it? Like there's definitely strength in growing together. I've got my team to I've created a content team brag book. So whenever we have like successful results or something that's gone really well, we put it in our team brag book so that we can just look back and say, hey, look at all this stuff we've done. Like we've made so much progress. The bit that I haven't got to is like, how do we then take that out to the wider organization and be like, hey, here's all the stuff we've done, aren't we great? That's like the next step on, I guess. But yeah, Amy, is that something you did at Nordea when you were kind of building the advocacy for your team?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, where the content designers were kind of embedded in those different teams, like I said, we would come together a couple of times a week for crits, but quite often we would just use that time just to talk together about how things were going and the different successes that we'd had, or anything that we'd kind of heard that we'd been like, oh, hey, would anyone be interested in going in and helping out and pick up there? Yeah, I think we're kind of all, maybe it's because we're a newer discipline, or yeah, it just feels like a very friendly space. I always feel like with content people, whether on Slack channels or on Twitter or in companies, everyone is always just so keen to help out, and there's never any kind of I don't know, I don't think we have the same egos as other areas of professions. Maybe it'll get there as it gets more mature, I'm not sure, but I feel like it's still at a stage where people are kind of very willing to help each other learn and support each other, and we had that at my last company, and like I say, we were always kind of looking for areas that we could see if we could go out there, whether it was having extra sessions with localization managers or translators or something like that we could improve on, or yeah, just kind of coming together and talking about how we could improve things and how we could support each other, basically.
Alex, how about you? I know one of the things when I was working I know you were at Virgin for a while, when I was doing some consultancy with Virgin, one of the things I was actually trying to get some of the content editors there to do was be a bit more kind of like documenting successes and tests, positive tests and things. But yeah, there wasn't when I was like working with the holidays team, it wasn't very much of a culture of that kind of thing. It wasn't, something that people really talked about. What was it like in your team there?
For a big chunk of my time at Virgin, it was quite chaotic because of COVID. I know COVID did funny things to every industry, but it literally grounded every plane we had. So we kind of really lost track of documenting our success and celebrating it. One of the reasons that I wrote like a kind of summary blog as I left Virgin was just to remind myself and my team of all this amazing stuff we'd done. I ended up putting it on Medium, but I kind of started writing it just to be like a goodbye, and like, we need to remember all this amazing stuff we did together, because when we were in it in the moment, we didn't kind of think that much about it. It was, you know, there were moments where you thought, am I going to have a job next week? And so you just weren't thinking about documenting things. In like my new role, I've kind of was delighted to find there's a really well-established career framework there, and that exists across every role in P&T, including content design. And in fact, we've just finished writing one for the content editors. And I think, again, like a framework like that can be a really good way of building like people's confidence, because they sort of understand what they need to do to move up that framework. And then when they move up, rightly so, they're proud. Hopefully it comes with more pay, more responsibility. I think if you're just sort of in a like single job role with no obvious path, it's quite easy to get stuck there. And I don't know, like you get stuck in a rut, you stop celebrating successes, you stop growing. And I think those things all go hand in hand, you know?
Yeah. The other thing I was just thinking about when you said that was about actually one of the things I put into my role expectations was advocacy and advocating for your discipline. So there's like a really clear expectation there, depending on the level that you're at, there's an expectation of a different sort of level of advocacy. So for example, when you're at a lower level, it might be advocating for your discipline within the design team versus, you know, you're advocating in the wider organization or beyond in the wider community, but having like, this is part of your role. You know, I had someone come up to me once and say, what if you just don't want to advocate for content design? And this was like a content designer. It's like, what if you can't be bothered and you just don't have the time? It's like, well, you know, it comes back to that point. We're all in this together, right? It's not just one or two people's job to like advocate for the discipline. It's everybody's job. Yeah, I just was like super keen that was kind of baked in, because we can't like carry everybody. We've all got to sort of play our role in this advocacy and education. I mean, it's not just content design that have to advocate for our role, you know, design and UX design and research. We've all been doing it for years, is trying to like educate an organization on the value of doing research or the value of design thinking. It's not unique to content design. And I think that's sometimes good to remember, is that, you know, everybody in tech seems to be having to advocate for their role in some way, shape or form. I was just wondering as well, like from a personal perspective, what have you found helpful in terms of building confidence to speak about your work in public and sort of put yourself out there a little bit? I mean, I guess, Gladys, for you, the media relations background was probably quite helpful in that respect.
I agree. Yes, I cheat a little bit, but you know, in media relations, yes, you can speak, but I was more comfortable being in the back and being more about strategy and helping my clients do the work, because I was not doing it. I was just framing everything to make them comfortable. I was training them. But yes, I knew how to do it. But I can really tell that I was scared, because yes, when you're in media relation, you're the expert at helping people communicate. You're not the communicate. I mean, you're not the person who talk. But what I had to do when I started doing it was to be in front of people and tell the story or what I believed in or the work or anything. And that's scary. I think that scares even people who are professional about communication are scared. I was personally, but you know, after a while, I just said, I help all those people. I can do it. I know I can do it. I'm scared, but I'm going to say yes. And I said yes, but with a topic, like I said earlier, I was passionate about, and I didn't want to put my ego first and say, I'm scared, I'm not going to do it. My English is not good enough. I'm not good enough for anything, or I have nothing to say. I said, I have this story and I want people, it was about inclusion. And I said, I know that people need to hear that. We need to change, not the world, but at least the design world, and what we can do. And so because I had this topic that was key and really important for me, I just forgot my ego and my scary part, and I just did the work, and finally other people came for other opportunities. But yes, it's scary, and I think it's scary for anyone.
I love that though. I love that because you had a cause in mind and a passion in mind. You almost did it anyway because that was more important than how you felt about doing it. And I think that's just, I don't know, it's a really good thing to remember, is actually the thing we're saying is more important than our ego and how we feel about putting ourselves out there. How about you, Amy?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I still find difficult, but I was very inspired by what Gladys was saying just there about, just letting go of that, that kind of worry and how it feels. I think for me, it's kind of the fear of either saying something really obvious or, something that's covered by someone else, but then, everything is kind of, we're not always discovering really new things, but we're finding new ways of looking at things or seeing things, and every person has a different viewpoint or experience or perspective. So I still do think that it's worth doing, just because you never really know who needs to hear what you've got to say. So I think it's kind of getting over that fear of either adding to noise or just kind of being really obvious, because you don't know really who what you're going to say is going to reach, who you might want it to reach, but actually anyone could find what you're talking about and find it really helpful or really useful. So I think it's worth doing, and it is worth putting that fear aside and just finding a story that you want to tell and finding your way to get it out there.
I think it's such an important thing to remember that only you have your perspective. So and that's what you're bringing, is your kind of unique perspective, and it, like you said, it doesn't have to be something brand new that you're talking about. It just has to have your own perspective on it. Alex, what are your sort of tips to overcome that fear of public speaking?
So I think with time, I've learned a lot more about the sort of things which trigger fear in me and which things trigger less fear, because I'm not going to pretend like it's not a bit nerve-wracking to talk. But I realized that for me, the biggest fear was to suddenly feel like I had nothing to say. And I've never been someone who's been able to learn word for word, like a 20-minute talk or something. And so actually that's why something like an interview or a panel, a conversation, I feel much more comfortable with, because I like communicating like that. When people have asked me to sort of give talks, then I've learned like the best way to do that for me. So as we said earlier, one of them was that I went along with a colleague, Laura, and we talked together. And also I find that, bullet points and ideas to then sort of freestyle about works for me. I can't remember a script. I know for some people that's their worst nightmare. Back at uni giving presentations, I had a friend who would remember a half-hour presentation word for word, and she was amazing at it. I couldn't do it. And that expectation that maybe I was meant to be able to do it made me feel even more nervous. And that's what I meant about time, really. Like, I've realized I don't have to do it like that. I do it how I find it comfortable, and then I feel not too nervous about it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that feel. I love that thought of just find the thing you're comfortable with, like the medium you're comfortable with, whether it's a panel, whether it's a talk, whether it's writing. Find that thing that you feel comfortable and confident doing. And yeah, that's so helpful. That's such a good thing to remember. I don't like doing big long talks either, because I feel like I struggle to sort of structure it. Even though I'm a content designer, or by my background is a content designer, I still feel like a talk has to, I don't know, I always look at other people's talks and think, oh, their slides are so good, they're telling such a good story, and I never feel like that about my own. So I definitely don't feel comfortable doing talks like that either. I totally get that. I've got like I suppose a slightly more controversial sort of topic to finish on, really. I think like the kind of biggest advocacy that is missing is us talking about content design and the importance of content within design communities or within UX design conferences. Like there's so many content conferences, and there's so many content communities, but often feels like we're sort of advocating for content to each other, which is a bit of an echo chamber. But it's so like it can be really quite intimidating to go and talk at a design conference, for example. But I feel like it's so important, because if we want content design to be on the same level as you know, product design, and viewed at the same level, we've got to get on those agendas. We've got to get content on those agendas. And I'm wondering if you've got any views of what we could be doing more as a collective community to get ourselves or get people from our community out and onto the agenda at design and UX conferences. And I'm sort of really interested in your views on that. I'll start with you on that one, Gladys.
Apply, even if I never got a talk applying, but apply. I think it's a muscle. We just need to apply, and you know, I love the confab button application form, because they help you structure everything. So you just go and pick the thing and create and imagine content and apply. But then my perspective is, I mean, it's not my perspective. I think we know that the experience is all about content. If you go, I mean, an Apple Watch, it's content, website, voice assistant, everything is content. So if you don't consider content, in fact, you're compromising on the experience you create. And so what I like to show is that the work we do has an impact on everything, on the way people think, on the way, I don't know, with the type of relationship we create, everything. And so we just need to show that it's not only words, it's everything about emotional design and many things. So we just need to take the subject. But, you know, my last point about that, each time I tell French people, because I have had this discussion with French people, I said, all the book you read and you love, emotional design, designing for cognitive biases, I mean, it's content people who wrote them. So we are really good at finding the right stories. We just need to be able to share them globally.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to people, isn't it? That's written by a content person. Alex, what do you think? How do you think we infiltrate those communities a bit more?
For me personally, I think it's just about reconnecting with all these communities, because as I sort of mentioned, there were a couple of years where work just, you know, work was too much on its own without necessarily even then interacting with the outside world, the outside content world, never mind kind of, you know, UX and product design and stuff. So yeah, for me, it's just about, you know, getting back, reading those Medium articles, reading the newsletters, coming to things like this. And then who knows, maybe I will then feel like I can go and speak at a conference, or at least try to go and speak at a big design conference. But I think I need to just start by going there and being part of the chat in the room after the talks. I guess that's a good thing for all of us to do, right?
Yeah.
I went to UX London about 10 years ago, maybe, and absolutely loved it. Haven't managed to go back since, because I've never found an employer to pay for it. But, you know, we need to go to these conferences, and then, you know, we'll speak at them, but we'll do that by kind of becoming part of that community.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm in the Leading Design Slack, and there's a content design channel in there, but there's hardly anyone. But yeah, I mean, I hopefully we'll get to a point one day where there won't be specific channels for research or content. We'll all just be part of one big community. Yeah, so Amy, what are your thoughts on how we kind of get to that through?
Yeah, I was trying to think about kind of what we can do as leaders and people working with other content colleagues, and I think it is about taking that time, whether it's in like a one-to-one or just grabbing a coffee or something, and yeah, having those conversations and making those connections with them, finding out what people are working on, and just encouraging them to share their experiences and to go for the things that maybe they feel like is a little bit out of reach or something. I think it is. Yeah, we just kind of need to keep encouraging each other that actually there are these really interesting stories to tell, and that they don't always have to tell it to the same groups of people. Is there someone else who might be really interested in hearing from them? Yeah, it's helping other people get their stories out there as well, I think, where we can do.
Definitely. Thank you all. So we've only got 10 minutes left, and I realized we've chatted for quite a long time. So I'd just like to ask our attendees, if anyone has any questions for the panel, please feel free to come off mute and ask them, because I mean there's not many of us. So Mike, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I got multiple questions, but I'll try to let other people jump in before I ask others. But I guess if I were to pick my top question, which is hard, but I've heard Figma being mentioned a couple times in this call. When it comes to advocacy and, you know, advocating for involvement, you know, equal involvement with your product designer peers, there's only so much you can say, or even so much you can show. But if you're actually collaborating directly in Figma, which we are hopefully moving toward, but we're not there yet. But I imagine that it almost becomes a given, because you're pretty much forced to work together when you're both in the same design artifact, working together in it. So for any of you who are at that point, I'd love to hear kind of what difference that has made in your jobs and when it comes to advocacy and all that.
Anyone like to take this one?
I'm happy to say a first thing, and something that I've really helped or find has helped working for me when I was getting used to Figma. I was so scared of doing anything wrong and messing up designs and auto layouts and all these things that I didn't understand. So I would say always just kind of feel free to go in and set up yourself like a little playground or a draft space or somewhere like that. Copy over what you've got and then have a play around in there, and then you'll feel a lot more confident going back to your designer and say, hey, I was playing around, I've put in some words here, these are my kind of content suggestions, as maybe a stepping point if you kind of want that learning point before you start collaborating in there straight away. It used to terrify me when I could see like someone else's mouse hovering around on a Figma board when I wasn't really totally sure what I'm doing. And the more you can kind of share early with them that way as well, that will give you some nice confidence, hopefully.
Alex and Gladys, anything to add there?
I would just say make sure that kind of, collaborating in Figma doesn't stop you having like lots of check-ins, like either in person or, over video chat and stuff. So I've just found that some of the content designers in my team, they collaborate in Figma, but that doesn't stop the designer kind of duplicating, running off, doing a ton of stuff for the day. And then there's that whole like, oh, I've done all this stuff that I've not shown you. And it's like those personal relationships and that kind of ways of working together are still really important, even when you're in the same tool. That would be my tip, I think.
And what I can add, I agree with everything, but what I can add, what worked the best was when we worked together with the product designer. Like we took an afternoon and we worked together on everything and agreed and disagreed sometimes. And sometimes we were working on different versions of the same idea. And I know that because at the end of the session, you know that you agree on most of the things. And we have a common ground and we learn to work together. And it's much easier than when we work asynchronous, okay, not at the same time, because sometimes we do that, but when you know each other, it's much easier to do that. But when you don't, it's better to work together and agree and disagree and collaborate really.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think so even in Figma, it can be so tempting for product designers to just do the designs and then say they're ready for the content. And it's like, no, like just because you've got a collaborative tool, it's only collaborative if you use it collaboratively. And yeah, that still takes a lot of that kind of relationship building and stepping away from the Figma for a little while before doing it. So yeah.
But just one point, just before being in Figma, you have paper, and usually what we do, we still have workshop with paper, and where both of us design and we still agree or disagree or whatever. And then yes, someone has, and most of the time it's going to be the product designer. They're going to frame what we agreed in Figma. But then it's iterative. So this is when we start being in the product, but we still have the discussion.
Yeah, so important. So important.
Thank you.
Fraser.
Hi there. Yeah, there's been a lot of change where I work, like everywhere, I guess. I feel like I'm kind of advocating for content within the design team all the time as new people come in, people leave. But what I wanted to ask about was a bit wider than that. The kind of agile is really starting to be rolled out where I work. I just wondered whether there were any particular opportunities with that being rolled out to advocate for content. I've got some time with like the tribe lead next week. As you'd expect, I'm across about 4 squads. As a content designer, the product designer has 1 squad, 1 squad each. Yeah, I just wonder if there were any tips, any experience about within Agile to advocate for content design.
I sort of feel your pain in that, because I worked in a team once where we were working in Agile sprints, and I was across 6 product teams, and there's no way I could be in every planning meeting, and there's no way I could be there saying what my tasks were going to be and sizing my tasks. I found the most useful thing was either catching up with the Scrum lead or product manager if I couldn't be in those planning sessions, like just individually to go through what my tasks might be in that sprint. And I also found what was quite useful, and that's why it's really important to get a product designer who you can buddy up with and understands content design, because then sometimes they can represent you and estimate your tasks and make sure that they'll have like a pretty good, after working with you for a while, they tend to have a pretty good understanding of what you need to do from a content point of view, and you can like maybe kind of get them to like represent you in some of the planning meetings, because otherwise you could end up being in like just spending your whole life in agile ceremonies and not actually doing any work. So I feel your pain in that. I don't know, the others have probably got some experience and advice around that as well. Anybody want to share their experiences with that?
Yeah, I mean, mine actually is a kind of, at the moment, I'm sort of watching this space with it, because everything got shuffled around at Zoopla just before I joined. And actually, so there aren't enough content designers to be 1 in every squad, which is sort of a standard problem. But actually, the way we're working now is that we have the product designers working across a couple of squads as well. So they're in what we're calling work streams. And actually, in a funny way, because each squad doesn't have a product designer, and they're more comfortable with product designers because it's an older discipline, even if the name might have changed, because they have to reach out and request like help from the product designers, I actually think it makes them more likely to then request help from the content designers, because that kind of having to get people involved when they're required is there. I'm not saying it's the best way to work. Ideally, I think you'd have content designers and product designers in every single squad. But that imbalance of having a product designer in every squad without a content designer in every squad really is an issue. You can definitely have the product designer kind of running off and doing everything without consulting if you're not careful. So that relationship is really key, that they still know to get the content designer involved.
Thank you.
We're pretty much at time. So, Mike, I know you said you've had lots of questions, but I'm sure the panel won't mind if you post them on our Slack community, and we'll be happy to answer them. Or if you want to message anyone individually, I'm sure people will be happy to answer your questions. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and especially to our panelists. It's been a great conversation. You know, it's a great conversation when you run out of time. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah. If anyone isn't on our Slack community yet and wants to be, let us know in the chat and we can send you a link to that. But yeah, thank you, everybody.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.